Hello, my guest today is President and Design Principal of KPF Architects, Jamie von Klemperer. KPF, one leading global architectural practitioners. So, Jamie, perhaps you would tell me, how has COVID-19 impacted on your work to date?
We've adapted very, very quickly. The first week felt like a kind of emergency. We had to attend every meeting, to talk about every issue, to work double time, to check in with each other, to ask ourselves, were our ideas sound? Were we producing good ideas, good thoughts, documenting well? What about quality control? But after about a week or two, seems to have settled into a pretty good rhythm of changing slightly the way we operate, but still going back to basic principles of tutoring the young architects once a day, twice a day, of spending enough time on our drawings, not to only meet all the time, with every conversation being virtual, the sharing of information at the same time, all the time, and the marking up of drawings has made it, at least for me at the senior level, more participatory if I want and when I have time to do that. So I enjoy that. I can sort of get to peek in whenever I want. And I also, because we have, perhaps 50 projects going at a time in the office, and I might be in some way involved with 10 or 20, I can choose which one to pop into. The spreading out of our workload and opportunities into 4 or 5 major markets around the world, geographically, completely diverse, has naturally been a big help. If we were to rely right now on the work that we could find in New York or the East Coast or even the United States, we would be suffering seriously, I think. The fact that at the moment, even in the very, very short view of a couple of months of the Asian societies and economies being further along in this COVID crisis than we are here in New York or even London. Right now in China, for example, quite a few new projects coming to us, either by competition or by direct award, that have all the hallmarks of stimulus package projects. Semi-governmental clients or outright governmental clients, asking us to get ready or get going right away for projects that are basically shovel-ready kinds of projects.
Thinking about the effect on city planning and COVID-19, I can remember after 9/11, there was thought that maybe tall buildings didn't have much of a future. People wouldn't want to work in them anymore, but actually almost the opposite happened. They became ubiquitous around the world, or more so even. What do you think the impact is likely to be of the current pandemic? Do you think we're going to see a resurgence of the suburbs?
If we look at the influence of plagues and fires in large cities, whether Venice, London, New York, other parts of the world, usually there's been a kind of exodus and then a creeping back into density over the longer term. So, in New York City, Bank Street, which was one of the nicest gentrified streets of townhouses in Greenwich Village, which is almost kind of an urban suburb, was named Bank Street because there was a bit of a pestilence sometime in the early 19th century, perhaps, and then all the banks went way north to Greenwich Village. Well, of course, that didn't stop Wall Street from becoming a much, much denser, super city, part of the city that it became. And I think that's likely to happen in this case as well. But I do think that to be optimistic about this, as architects tend to be, there are perhaps some positive lessons or changes or advantages in the way we use buildings that will come out of this. First of all, the sort of flexibility of work. And if we're talking about the workplace at this point, we can talk about housing as well, but the compulsive need to be at work all the time, beyond really what's productive, and the sort of destructive aspect to the life of the family for those who really can't make it into the workplace in less than an hour, and then child rearing becomes an issue, and whether it's mother or father staying at home. I think most workplaces, most offices are thinking now we really have to make a place for this. And so the density, I think, of occupancy of the center cities will be affected. Because even if we all say, well, let's spend either individually a day at home, or if we average out, weeks out or months out for mothers, fathers, if it turns out to be about a day out of the office a week, that's 20%. Well, 20% vacancy would kill the market in any large city or change it drastically. On the other hand, for the short term, we are asked now in New York, there are provisional policies being cooked up to go back to work, the entry that's being discussed at the national level and state and city. And so one of the most recent forecasts is that we'll be asked to occupy at less than 50% density, or maybe even 25% density. So we're carefully putting together seating plans of separating out and imagining the population will be, that much less people. Some people stay home. It may be that that's a bit extreme because we need to be right now. But in the longer term, perhaps there's some idea that health is promoted by less density in the office building. And that might mean that we actually need those high-rise buildings because the demand for space is now going to be parsed out over fewer people per square or per square foot, let's say. So, you'll need that extra space. In fact, we took some extra space in our building just before this crisis broke in Asia and then in New York. And we're stuck with a lease. We're taking a little, but good thing, because now we have to go back and de-densify. We have an extra, 5,000 square feet to spread people around. But I think on the whole, long term, I think we will come back to modified version of the density that we're used to.
I have to say, in London, the government here is being very cagey as to what policies it might institute when that happens. What's the thinking at the moment in New York?
I think there is a feeling right now of some consternation. We find how, at this point, how actually libertarian we are, that we accept very, very little in the way of any kind of organized regulation or guidance, and everything that flows very quickly in the way of change in response to the situation in Hong Kong is just unthinkable here. There's a great complacency. So I think, it's no wonder. I mean, New York is such a wonderful place, but sometimes virtues also point out fallibilities. And New York is just the least well-suited to deal with this crisis, which is why our numbers are so high. And we aren't even the master of our own territory because we're not the capital of anything, not even of the state, let alone the nation. So dealing with regulation from at least 3 different sources, state, local, federal. New Yorkers are, though, quite resilient. So at least that's a good thing. If they're chaotic, they're at least resilient. So I think we can expect some changes to the way public transit is managed. I think we can expect some changes in elevator technology. We're not rebuilding all of our buildings. Can't do that in a heartbeat, but the way maybe every elevator system will be retooled to go to destination control, where you don't have to press buttons when you're in the elevator. It might seem to be a trivial detail. An elevator, we should be thinking, or a lift, we should be thinking about a whole city. But in fact, New York is tied together by its vertical transportation. That's what a vertical city does. So I think there's a lot of speculation about whether or not streets can be transformed into parks. If we take parking, which is of limited use in New York anyway, because people use the parking spots on the streets, but they could do without the cars because there is public transit. The street is a great linear network of parks. I don't mean that we'll break up the pavement and put in plants, but just as places to walk, run, promenade, bike with space in between, at least for this period, let's call it maybe a year and a half, the COVID period that I think we all imagine, not total lockdown, but there's got to be some impact, at least in this period. That will be a kind of a spatial transformation. But I think there are a lot of discussions now about how zoning might change a little bit to encourage a de-densification, and sub-centers might be given more impetus to become more robust and then move the workforce out to different parts of the city. But all in all, perhaps these are healthy things. I mean, not just health for today, but maybe in the structure of the city, these can be seen to be long-term beneficial. But one final thing to add, though, I think that as we talk about long-term, short-term, for many of us, I think all of us, waking up in the morning as architects 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, the existential threat we felt was about climate change. And we were quite determined that this was the mission of our profession. And the way in which the sort of policy forces that are brought up by the health crisis are fairly diametrically in conflict with the issues, or can be the issues of health crisis, is very puzzling to us, because density was one of the not the savior, but one of the logical kind of ways in which to think about combating the use of too much fossil fuel. Yeah. Of course, having to do with transport, with surface area of buildings, et cetera. So how to reconcile these two issues, because you could argue, although it's hard, it would be very unpopular to argue this today out loud and in public, but you might say that the more intractable issue of the two is climate change.
So the AIA recently produced a rather well-timed Architect's Guide to Business Continuity. And couldn't you give me a bit, sort of key bit of advice you would give to your peers in this rather difficult time in terms of resilience of businesses?
Business hasn't stopped. The receivables of our firm, the bills and the receipts, have not decreased. Now, I won't be singing this tune 3 or 4 months from now. The issues of resiliency have less to do with the immediate response to health issues and proximity, because, as I mentioned, we're working very effectively from a distance. It has to do more with the economic, the huge economic blow to the process of growth, because architects thrive on some kind of growth, whether growth from within or new buildings. And when the heart stops beating, I mean, every industry will feel this. Although I was listening to a report from the chief strategist from the Bank of America yesterday at a seminar, saying that one of the first of the sectors of the economy to bounce back will be construction. And that may be because some of it was underway already, or stimulus kind of money can go to building things. But I think architects feel very vulnerable, redefining the kind of tasks that we do naturally and diversifying our work. I think any individual practice would feel this is an important thing to do. Whether that does anything for the whole profession, because we take work away from each other, I'm not so sure. And then continuing to explain why good architecture is very, very important. We'll have to do that even more vigorously than before, both at the public policy level and at the private interface with clients, et cetera.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be major impacts on the work that architects do going forward, and let's hope some of it is as a result of the stimulation of the economy that will be focused on construction projects, as of course it was in the States in the 1930s under the New Deal. So Jamie von Klemperer, thank you very much for your very thoughtful contribution to our discussion, and I look forward to seeing you in not too distant future in person.
Thank you, Peter. Very nice to chat with you. We'll see you soon.